Welcome in to the Rockies Insider, the only daily podcast brought to you by a Colorado Rockies beat reporter. I am your host, Patrick Lyons, and on today's show, we have to talk about opening day 2025. Something's in jeopardy. Not the game, it will be played, but where will it be played? On the schedule, it says Tampa Bay against the Tampa Bay Rays in Florida. The only question is, where is it going to be held after Hurricane Milton does serious damage to Tropicana Field? We'll break down all of the possibilities of what might come next for the Tampa Bay Rays and the Rockies, not just the implications of opening day, but their early season schedule, because they were counting on playing in St. Petersburg to open the 2025 slate. Now that doesn't happen, does that change some of their plans? We'll get into that in just a moment. But the news of the day for the Colorado Rockies on October 18th are the three transactions, or the three players that are going by the wayside for them. These three guys cleared outright waivers, and instead of electing to go to AAA and basically sticking around on the Rockies, just not on the 40-man roster, it was in their best interest to choose free agency. All three, I don't know that they come as a surprise, but there's at least one on the list that you probably would have hoped could stick around for the Rockies next season. But those three players are Jake Cave, Dakota Hudson, and Peter Lambert. Hudson was a one-year signing that could have turned into a two-year deal because he had another year of club control for 2025, but unfortunately just had a lot of trouble pitching at Coors, pitching for the Rockies this season. You understand why he signed a one-year deal with the Rockies to get some guaranteed money. According to MLB trade rumors, they do a wonderful job of projecting what the arbitration number is going to be for certain players, so you can kind of get a feeling if, hey, this player getting a very big raise next year might be too big of a raise because he's been hurt, or frankly, he was a lot better early on in his career than in the last year or two. And you can get an understanding of which players are going to be most likely to get non-tendered. And I think there might be one or two still remaining for the Rockies, but Colorado basically gets ahead of these non-tenders. Hudson was set to make around $2.3 million. And when you have an ERA around 6, and I don't want to pin all those losses on him. What did he lose? 12 games? Because we know that the Rockies lost 101. So that's not necessarily on him. Nevertheless, Dakota Hudson just didn't work out in Colorado. You also had Peter Lambert, who was a player set to make roughly $1.5 million in arbitration, a player that unfortunately never really came to fruition for him in Colorado. Had a huge 2019 debut. His first two outings, coincidentally, were both against the Cubs. His first ever start came at Wrigley Field, and he was great. Could show that he could hit as well. And there was a lot of promise. There was a lot of shine on Peter Lambert to be one of the next big young starters for the Colorado Rockies. And I, for one, really thought that he was going to be that, selected out of high school, out of San Dimas High School in California. And unfortunately, in 2020, just before the world shut down for the pandemic, he had that elbow issue and needed Tommy John surgery and couldn't really quite return to that form, to that future projection that I think a lot of people had for Peter Lambert, including myself. And so now he's somewhat of a long reliever type. And I really thought that Lambert might stick around for the Rockies based on how much Colorado had invested in him. They invest a lot in a lot of their players, but just in giving him continual opportunities, I was a little bit surprised that he got one again this year based on a track record that, wasn't too glowing. But he was able to give you a couple, spot outings, do the long reliever thing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it wasn't really enough to justify bringing him back when you can probably get a lot cheaper innings. Maybe not better, but you're going to be able to get a lot cheaper innings with the depth that the Rockies do have with their pitching. You might not like how great that depth is, but nevertheless, they certainly do have it. So he finishes up his tenure in Colorado, 6.28 ERA over the course of 4 years. 2020 did not play at all because of the Tommy John surgery. Was able to get back for 2 starts in 2021. Then 2022, again, injuries really kept him out of the loop. So wish nothing but the best for Peter Lambert to go out there. Still a relatively young guy. I mean, he's only 27 years old. Next year will be his age 28 season. So we'll see what happens with Peter Lambert. Could he end up coming back after going around, having his agency, shop around certain deals and say, hey, where can I latch on and guaranteed maybe a spot in someone's AAA rotation? Absolutely. I think that could happen for him. I hope it does. But will he come back to the Rockies? I'm thinking not. I think he's going to be able to find something else with another organization. And then the final one that, may come somewhat as a surprise. And I think the fan base, I don't know that the fan base was torn on Jake Cave, because I think early on in his tenure with the Rockies, a lot of people were upset that he was getting continual playing time, wasn't doing too much with it when you would have liked for a lot of those opportunities, a lot of those plate appearances to go to younger players. But then middle of June, that big moment, the check swing by Teoscar Hernandez that looked to be a strike. It was called a ball. Next pitch goes out, game-tying home run. Dodgers come back to win that game. Jake Cave goes apeshit, to use a word, goes crazy on the first base umpire, and all of a sudden, Jake Cave is the people's champ. He's a man of the people, and he started to play really well after that, and then pretty much got usurped by Sam Hilliard, who's set to make about the same amount of money that I think Jake Cave will make in arbitration. So you don't need 2 left-handed hitting veteran outfielders at $1.7, $1.8 million next year, especially when you've got a lot of young outfielders coming up in the pipeline. I don't know how they're going to get playing time. You don't want them sitting around on the bench just getting spot starts like Jake Cave was getting for a while and Sam Hilliard was getting before, obviously a lot more playing time in September. But nevertheless, couldn't really fit both of those guys on the roster. So Jake Cave is going to go off somewhere else and be a spark plug for another team. He's a guy that's been to a lot of places that won, right? He was with Philadelphia in 2023. You remember when he first came to the Rockies just before opening day, had somewhat of a look of shock, saying, well, I'm not going to repeat what he said exactly. Not that it was that bad, but you could read between the lines in the words that he was using. Just shocked, going from a team that was 1 win away from going to the World Series in the Phillies last year or in 2023, and was probable to make a deep run in the postseason again in 2024. And then at the last second, he gets shipped off to what ended up becoming the worst team in the National League. So also postseason appearances with the Twins in 2019 and 2020. So, he's been a player on a lot of winning teams, a fourth outfielder type, but nevertheless, he definitely has that intangible that I think a lot of teams out there are going to be interested in bringing in on a 1-year deal because he's got 1 more year before he would have naturally reached free agency after 6+ years of service time. So that clears up some room on the Rockies 40-man roster. Currently, they've got 38 spots taken up out of the 40-man roster. They're going to need to use 2 of those to bring guys off of the 60-day IL. There's no injured list when you get to the offseason. So all those players that were shut down for, the final half of the season or whatever it may be, they have to come back onto your active roster. So your 40-man roster actually is 40 men. We know what teams like the Dodgers and other clubs are able to do to get creative and find extra spots for players, but the Rockies will have to get down to that 40. They'll have to clear up some room ahead of the deadline in November to make sure that none of their higher prospects that they really value get poached in the Rule 5 draft. So I'll be talking about that in the coming weeks ahead, maybe even leaving an extra spot for the Rule 5 draft, which they were able to utilize this year with Anthony Molina, keeping him around for the duration of the 2024 season. So I don't really think there's going to be too much of a roster crunch. Each and every year, there's always prospects that various people like more than another. And every year, the Rockies only protect so many, and they expose a lot more. And a lot of those guys don't ever get taken in the Rule 5 draft. So no harm, no foul there. I don't think there's too much of a roster crunch. We'll see a lot more guys get protected again ahead of that Rule 5 draft. So Rockies usually do a good job of evaluating players from that perspective, making sure that they don't lose anybody like an Everth Cabrera. If you remember going back to the San Diego Padres days, he was a guy that was in the Rockies org, and they ended up losing him. And I'm sure that the Rockies would have preferred to have kept him around, but he did a nice job for the Padres there for a couple years. Let's get to the big story of the day. Tropicana Field. That's where the Rockies are supposed to open up their 2024 campaign. Only problem is Hurricane Milton has done a lot of damage to that. Tip of the cap to Mark Topkin, who does a great job covering the Rays for the Tampa Bay Times. He had an article drop this week. Everyone's pretty much been waiting on his next one. The big changing, or the evolution, I should say, of this story will come early next week, because there are going to be some engineering experts that will come out to the property. They'll check out Tropicana Field to get a better idea of the overall structural damage, because no one's actually been inside Tropicana Field, because it's a little bit dangerous, right? There's some roof struts that are in danger of falling, and there's a lot of different factors in there that you got to be cautious of. Let some things settle, cool down after Hurricane Milton, and then they'll go in to examine it, see how bad the damage is, see if the roof can even be salvaged. So they're not going to be able to play at Tropicana Field. In theory, you say, well, they could basically take off what was the previous roof and have an open air stadium. Weather is going to be a factor, which will be a key to all of the different sites I'll discuss here in a moment in Florida. But the biggest issue is there's no drainage at Tropicana Field. There's no need for drainage because they have a fixed roof. Water doesn't get in. So it's a turf field at Tropicana Field. It's turf, which means just a thin layer of plastic over concrete. And there's all kind of wiring and electrical issues beneath that concrete. So to create some kind of drainage system at Tropicana Field could take a long time, could be a lot of money, all for nothing. I don't even know if that's possible. So it's safe to say they will not be starting the season at Tropicana Field. Could they create a scenario in which they just play the first half of the season, maybe the first 3 months, maybe the first 2 months before moving back into Tropicana Field? Absolutely. We'll have a much better idea next week about whether or not that can happen. But for the Rockies, an opening day on March 27th, there's just no way that I see that they can play these games at Tropicana Field. Absolutely not. Now, the Rays do have a new ballpark in the pipeline that should be ready in 2028, but there's no way to magically snap a finger, wave a magic wand, no matter how much money you have, to go ahead and just have a brand new stadium. So they need a new place to play. And this really is unprecedented in baseball history. We've seen things before, when you had Hurricane Katrina, of course, down in New Orleans, and the Superdome obviously was impacted, has nothing to do with baseball. The Metrodome, if you remember, there was a really bad snowstorm in December of 2010 that collapsed the roof during a 24-hour snowstorm there in Minneapolis. Well, the Vikings had, some issues. They actually moved that game to Detroit, but the Twins, conveniently, they were moving into a new stadium, 2011, the first year of Target Field. So that actually didn't impact them and the nearly $23 million that it cost to fix the roof at the Metrodome, which is no longer even there. So again, this is unprecedented for a baseball team to have to figure out where they're going to play their next season. I think they might be able to get back to Tropicana Field at some point, but they almost have to right now plan or think and prepare for being at a brand new facility for all of 2025. A couple comments here already. Our good friend Yuki Can they play at Rickwood Field? No, but I like that idea. You had one game play there. They did make it major league ready for the Rickwood Classic last year. Could they go back there again? Probably not. They want to make it a permanent place, a permanent location for the Rays to be. But I like that idea. Maybe the Rays could just go around and almost be like the Harlem Globetrotters and just play games in different places all around the U.S. That would be great. Now, it wouldn't be great for the players that would have to deal with that. I also think, a key component of this that a lot of us aren't thinking about, and I know I wasn't at first, was there's a lot of employees. There's hundreds of employees who every day they go into the offices at Tropicana Field to get ready for the next season. They've got daily tasks. They've got things that they need to do day in and day out, all throughout the offseason. The games are the only things that we think about. The players, maybe even the in-game staff, the stadium faculty that are there. But there are daily folks, hundreds, that work for the Tampa Bay Rays, and to displace them, to be living out of a hotel, is not a tenable situation. So you can't have something like that. Stephen Cross saying in the chat, they very well could have played their last game at the Trop. Yeah, possibly. That's not a crazy statement to make, especially if the damage at Tropicana Field is that bad, where they've got a new stadium in 2028. So that's 25, 26, 27. You got 3 seasons that you've got to bridge to get to 2028. What's the number? What's the tens of hundreds of millions that you would have to reinvest into Tropicana Field to fix it for what would ultimately maybe be only 2 years? Because if the repairs are being done in 2025, now you're spending, say, $50 million for 2026, 2027. Do you really want to do that? Do you have to do that? This is where the other options become incredibly interesting, because this could give MLB an opportunity to entice some newer cities to get a taste of what Major League Baseball is like, so that when it does come time for expansion, now that expansion fee becomes even higher, because you've got so many different places that want Major League Baseball in their city. We all thought Las Vegas was going to be the 31st team, and then everyone else would have to fight for number 32. And now with the A's going to Las Vegas, probably. I say probably because that's not 100% a done deal. I think it probably will happen, but it's not officially a done deal yet. So Vegas is off the board. Yeah, you've got groups in Portland. You've got groups in Nashville. There are other places, other cities that would love to bring baseball back, but are they going to love it at a price tag of maybe $2 billion, which is one of those numbers that have been floated? Can they get that much money for baseball? But if you can entice some of these other cities, perhaps you're going to get that dollar that you're asking for. Now, Mark Topkin did a great job for the Tampa Bay Times. He said that there could be upwards of about 50 different sites for the Rays to use. And I think, as I just mentioned, the fact that there are hundreds of employees that work for the Rays, you're going to want to stay in Florida somewhere. Even if you were to move to Miami, which there are issues with that, you are displacing people. But at least you'd have some comfortability being in the same state. Probably going to know a lot of people. Maybe you can stay with family. It's still a rough situation, but at least you're in Florida. I think they're going to try to stay as close to St. Petersburg as possible. They've got some options. There actually is a baseball facility, or a former baseball facility, in Al Lang Stadium. It's currently home to the Tampa Bay Rowdies of the USL Championship. So that's basically AAA for MLS. It's the top minor league for Major League Soccer. It's an older facility. It was built in 1947. It was used not too long ago for a spring training site, but it's going to need upgrades. It's going to need to be converted from a former baseball facility that was a soccer facility, and you need to turn it back now into a baseball facility. All of these minor league sites, I think, would have to undergo some upgrades, because there are certain standards that separate minor league facilities and major league facilities. Just as there are differences that separate a professional ballpark, an independent ballpark, and a proper minor league facility. There are differences. there are standards that you have to step up to that I imagine over the course of 5 months, if we're talking about the end of March, you've got 5 months. If you make that decision today, you could upgrade just about any facility in the area. So Al Lang Stadium, I probably would have them be number one, playing in a minor league ballpark. Not great, especially when you've got the A's playing in a minor league ballpark in Sacramento next season. Not a good look for baseball right now at all. But there's no roof on Al Lang Stadium, and there's going to be a lot of weather delays. There's going to be a lot of issues with that. And I'm really curious if there's going to be any conspiracy theorists out there. Very curious if there's going to be any conspiracy theorists out there who say that Hurricane Milton was created by the government and Major League Baseball knew about this, because if you look on the schedule, Tampa Bay and the Rockies were scheduled to play on Thursday, March 27th, and there's no game on March 28th. Now, a lot of teams will do that in case there's a rainout so that they can still have their opening day or their home opener without issue. But Tampa Bay plays in Tropicana Field. They play in a domed stadium, so you are not going to have a rainout. You're not going to have a cancellation on opening day. It's guaranteed. Why would you possibly leave Friday open? Conspiracy theorists, run wild with it. But I just think it's a weird scheduling snafu. I still don't know why that happened. So now if you go to Al Lang Field or any other location in Florida and it does rain out and you don't have a roof, conveniently you can go ahead and have your game on Friday on March 28th. Guillaume, how you doing, buddy, in the chat? Appreciate you joining. So what are some of the other locations in that Tampa Bay region? Well, you've got the Disney complex, which the Rays played part of their spring training 2023 at. And in the past, Orlando has made certain overtures to Major League Baseball to try to get a team. Pat Williams, the guy who brought the NBA to Orlando with the Orlando Magic. In fact, there's a website you can check out. It's called OrlandoDreamers.com. He wanted a baseball team, Major League Baseball in Orlando. Unfortunately, Pat did pass away this past July, so it kind of remains to be seen if somebody else is going to be carrying the torch. Orlando is the 17th largest media market, but I think we can all agree that Major League Baseball in Florida, whether it's Miami or Tampa Bay, doesn't really work as far as attendance goes. They are definitely small market teams that don't really allow the baseball product to shine as well as a lot of other places. So I don't think we'll ever see Orlando have a major league team in our lifetime. I could be wrong. Money talks. But I don't think that's going to happen. In Clearwater, you've got Baycare Ballpark. That's used by the Phillies as their spring training site. Dunedin's TD Ballpark. You may have remembered the Blue Jays played there during the pandemic. And then in Tampa proper, because Tampa Bay Rays actually play in St. Petersburg. That's why they're Tampa Bay. But Tampa has Steinbrenner Field where the Yankees play. The issue with all three of those is they have Florida State League teams that are there. They are minor league baseball sites as well. So they're used for spring training in February and March. And then in April, they turn around and now it's a minor league facility. So you could displace one of those teams, maybe for part of the year, maybe for the entire season. And maybe one of those minor league teams then uses Al Lang Stadium. Perhaps those are options. Again, Marlins Park is one of those places that you could go. I think it's about 3.5 hours away, give or take, from St. Petersburg area. But there is 49 conflicting dates that both the Rays and Marlins are home. So you can't do that. You could have a lot of double headers possibly. I don't know. In the chat, how about cities with two teams like New York and Chicago? Yeah, I mean, look, you can have two teams in the same city, but we already have a schedule that's made up. So this kind of goes back to the Marlins, where you say, all right, well, we'll just, for this year, we'll have two teams playing in Miami. We already know that attendance isn't great for Tampa. It's not great for the Marlins as well. But you could both play there. Only issue is using the same facility. They both have home dates that conflict. So I don't know how you can possibly work around that. So any other city that you go to play those games, you're going to have some kind of conflict, right? Now, one of the more interesting one that Guillaume points out, I think our buddy Guillaume is from Canada. Olympic Stadium in Montreal is being renovated, currently has no roof or tarp in this case. And that's one of the spots that I think a lot of people initially thought, well, can't Tampa just go play up in Montreal? Sure, that sucks for everyone involved, for the employees, for Tampa Bay Rays fans. There might not be many of them, but they do exist, and that's not fair to them. But you got to figure out 2025. Now, some of you might remember a few years ago, Stuart Sternberg had this concept of having a sister city playing in two different towns, playing in two different cities, two different ballparks. They essentially were going to be the Tampa Bay X-Rays of Montreal. X, of course, being an homage to the Expos. The Rays had the idea for 2.5 years. Apparently, they were working on this, and they had hyper focus on getting something done where they would play in Tampa Bay when the weather was not as nice up in Canada, up in Montreal for the first 2+ months. And then after early June, boom, they would go up to Montreal and play there. The two cities would somehow share postseason hosting. Obviously, that someone was going to be upset when you did something like that. But that was the idea before it was ultimately squashed. Again, you've got team personnel and players that would have to live in two places, maybe not at once, but you've got to move during the course of the season. That doesn't really work out too well. So if Olympic Stadium is off the table due to those renovations, again, you're running out of options. You've got the Rays AAA ballpark in Durham, North Carolina, the home of the Durham Bulls. They've got a schedule with conflicts. Now, Raleigh, I don't believe has a team because Raleigh-Durham, right, that's kind of that region. So Durham has a team. Raleigh doesn't. That's been one of those cities that has been floated for a major league team, along with Charlotte and Nashville. They both have AAA ballparks and have been rumored to be really good cities for expansion. That could happen. Again, there are teams that play there. San Juan, Puerto Rico, I think would be a very interesting one. That has already hosted some big league games. That would probably get some pushback from the Players Association. I could see that. You can't go to Las Vegas because that's already off the table if the Athletics are going there. Also, in Mark Tompkins' article, he says, the largest stadium in the U.S., the largest baseball stadium in the U.S. that doesn't have a big league team in it is Charles Schwab Field in Omaha, Nebraska, home of the College World Series. You've got 24,000 there. Could Omaha, Nebraska be the host site for the Tampa Bay Rays? Probably not. But it could. It could. I don't think seating is a big deal right now, especially because, again, we know the Rays don't have 30,000 going out to their ballpark consistently. I'm not sure they even get that for opening day, to be honest. But otherwise, I don't think the stadium capacity is a big thing. You just have to have the facility to be major league caliber for both the players on the playing field. That's really the only thing that's the most important part. And then you say, well, let's try to stay as close to St. Petersburg as possible. That's really where we're at for this. And the impact on the Rockies, it's going to be little to nothing, but it's something. It is something because the Rockies actually scheduled themselves. Now, typically, they finish up their slate of Cactus League games down in Scottsdale, down at Salt River Field. Seems like it's always the Brewers is the final team that ends up hanging around. They'll play them on March 24th. And then on March 25th, on that Tuesday, they're actually scheduled to play the Minnesota Twins in Fort Myers, Florida for a spring training game, exhibition game, same difference. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So because opening day on the 27th was supposed to be St. Petersburg, Florida, they scheduled a game with the Twins. Why would they do that? I think probably brings in a little bit of additional revenue. to play an extra game there where the Twins can go out and have that game. But now, are they going to play that game if the Rays end up having to open in Nashville or Durham and maybe have a little bit of unnecessary travel? I think Nashville, Durham isn't too bad, but still, you are planning on unpacking, getting settled for 3-4 days, 5 days in the Tampa Bay area. You can take a bus to where the Twins train in Fort Myers, and it's easy peasy. But to get back on a plane to fly up to a Charlotte or Durham, whatever it may be, or even just a short flight over to Miami, if that's where they end up playing, I don't know. So it remains to be seen. Will they have to cancel that date on their calendar? I'm not sure, but it's not really too critical if they have to go elsewhere for that opening series that starts on March 27th against the Rays, because they don't actually go and play Miami in the next series. There's been a lot of seasons in which they play the Rays, they play the Marlins, they're done with Florida. Not the case this year. Their second series is against Philadelphia for the Citizens Bank Park home opener. So if they got to travel a little bit further north, they're a little bit closer to their next destination before they return home. And they've got their home opener back at Coors Field on April 4th against the Athletics. I say that with a question mark because they're formerly the Oakland Athletics. They're technically going to be the Sacramento Athletics, but I believe officially they're just Athletics. Not the Athletics Baseball Club, just Athletics. Very strange to say that the Rockies home opener this year will be against Athletics. That's baseball for you right there. So, look, there's going to be an opening day 2025. We just don't know where it's going to be right now. Next week, we'll have a much better idea as far as the damage to Tropicana Field. We'll have a much better idea if certain facilities become an option for the Rays so that they can get that handled. They can make those upgrades as soon as possible, get all the front office personnel, all of the employees, the hundreds of employees for the Tampa Bay Rays that need to find a new home and a new place to be. They're going to try to get that squared away as soon as possible. I'll let you know about that. If the site ends up changing, make sure you're going over on the podcast side, because there are some days in which I do an audio only podcast to discuss either the playoffs, some smaller moves by the Rockies, different transactions, the Arizona Fall League as well. Make sure you're heading over to the Rockies Insider Podcast. I appreciate if you did join here live on YouTube. Everyone that's in the chat, appreciate you giving me that momentum to go forward on social media at Rockies_Insider. Then my personal account at Patrick D. Lyons and at Patrick D. Lyons MLB. Appreciate everyone in the last couple days getting hyped up and remembering so many of the things that they've loved about the Colorado Rockies, so much of what they've loved about this organization, from the anniversary of the Rockies clinching to go to the 2007 World Series, which was this past week, along with the groundbreaking ceremony, which was 32 years ago this week, and pictures of what Lodo looked like, lower downtown Denver. So much different than what it looks like today. So appreciate all the love and support from everybody on the social medias, in here on YouTube. I need that momentum, and thank you again. I did enjoy my vacation up to Steamboat Springs. It's relaxing. It was what I needed. Appreciate that, Guillaume. You gave me some momentum. So did Yuki. So did our guy Steven. Appreciate that momentum. But as I like to say, that momentum is only as good as my next podcast. So, of course, I'll talk to you then.